We are all familiar with political parties, especially after this last election. It seems more polarized than ever. But what do the political parties stand for, and why are there only two parties? We're going to learn more about that in our flipped classroom number 2. So, it's a party, but not the kind with ice cream and cake. A political party is an organized group of people who share the same political views and work to influence the government in support of those views. Political views are a person's ideas about how the government should run and how the issues facing our country should be solved. Political parties fight to gain political power by having candidates elected to office. They exist at every level of government, from the national level to your very own neighborhood. By organizing into political parties, people have more power to influence government than if they acted alone. So this is why we see success when you run with the Democrat or the Republican Party. But if you ran as a third-party candidate, or if some of you have ever heard of Ralph Nader, it's why those third-party candidates don't win, because it's easier when you have a larger collective because there's more money to fund you and a lot more people to listen to your platform. The big two. In the United States, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are the two main political parties. But are there other parties? Of course. The U.S. technically has a multi-party system, but there are two parties that have gained so much power that almost every other person elected to the government office belongs to one of them. Most Americans identify with one of the two parties, but did you know that 40% of Americans identify as politically independent? That means they don't want to identify with any party. Most independents end up voting for either a Democrat or a Republican, and many lean towards one party or the other. Independents may be more open to supporting candidates from either party, and some independents are elected into office. So while this does happen, it's very rare. Most of you know by now the donkey represents the Democratic Party, and the elephant represents the Republican Party. But let's talk about that third party. What does that mean? Many political parties exist in the United States. Candidates for political office can represent any party, but that doesn't mean you'll see everyone's name on the ballot. Every state has different rules about ballot access, which allows a political party to put a candidate on the ballot. Usually, the rules involve getting a certain number of signatures from registered voters. These rules keep most third parties from even offering a candidate for voters to choose from. The Democratic and Republican parties have ballot access in all states. The Libertarian Party is the largest third party, and ballot access for the presidential election, they have that access in the presidential election in more than 30 states. Additionally, as of 2015, the Green Party had ballot access in over 20 states, and the Constitution Party had access in over 10 states. So this just deals with how easy it is for those parties to get their people on the ballot, basically. So let's take Trump and Clinton, for example. So they're both of the big parties. They had the ability to put people on the ballot. But some of you might have heard of Jill Stein. She was also on the ballot in some states. So she's not a Democrat or a Republican. Why could she be on the ballot? It has to do with that ballot access. So her party did have ballot access. So you could see more than the two options, Trump or Clinton, on a ballot. And she got a lot of the votes that people were basically just like, I don't want Clinton, I don't want Trump, I'll go with anyone else. So she got a lot of those votes. Unfortunately, it doesn't, when election day comes, most people align with either conservatives or liberals, and they vote that way consistently. All right, now let's talk about write-in voting. Did you know that you could actually write in a candidate? So just like the parties can put people on the ballot, you can put people on a ballot as well. Most ballots, this does not include Hawaii, do include a place to write in the name of the candidate who is not on the ballot. So this is one way you could vote for a third-party candidate who doesn't have ballot access. Did you know that every year there's every election there's 20,000 people who vote for Mickey Mouse? They write him in. So it is possible in other states. Maybe it's different, but I get my ballot mailed to me. So on my ballot this year, I didn't see a place for write-in voting, but maybe ask your parents and find out, is there a place if you go into the voting booth to do so? All right, let's talk about the last piece of these two parties. So how do they decide what their values are? This process is called creating a party platform. One thing political parties have in common is that they stand for something. If you want to know what a party believes in, its platform is a document that describes the party's views on all of the major issues facing the nation. This set of statements is often called a platform because it's a set of values or beliefs that a political party stands on. The Democratic and Republican parties both keep their platforms broad and simple so they can attract as many supporters as possible. And honestly, if you were just looking at the platforms, it could be hard to tell the difference on some issues. For instance, both parties might say that they want better education or more jobs, but what does that mean, and how do they want to get those things? The party's platform explains what the party thinks better education looks like and how jobs should be created. You can find a political party's platform by going to the party's website. So that might be an interesting place to look for your research project. Just look up the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or even the Green Party and find out what is on their platform, and then maybe research one of the topics that they bring up. And maybe you pose that topic and you show both sides. What would it look like for a Republican? What would it look like for a Democrat? Or maybe even what would it look like for a independent? So that could be an interesting topic proposal. All right, let's move to the next. All right, political parties support candidates, right? In the United States, you're obviously aware that political parties during election seasons play a pretty big role. Candidates who are running for political office almost always declare themselves a member of a political party. And by doing this, a candidate gains support from the political party and makes it easier for voters to figure out what the candidate believes in and where they stand on issues. Yet at the same time, political parties fight hard to get candidates from their party elected. Party committees at the local, state, and national level work to support their candidates by raising money, campaigning, educating voters, and urging people to vote on Election Day. Now, for those of you who have not been a part of an election yet, this is a really cool process to sit in on, whether you're not, you totally agree with the candidate, working on a party, or working for a political party, or working for a candidate is really eye-opening. Like, what is the process like on the inside? So if any of you are interested in that, I would love to help you kind of make some connections in the community and research more about what that might look like, because it really is eye-opening and it's a great networking opportunity for you. Let's go ahead now and look at political parties inside the government. Candidates who are elected to office work to pass laws and solve problems. While each government official has his or her own views, the laws and the solutions they support usually align with their political party's platform. In the U.S., Congress and in state legislatures, the balance of power between Republicans and Democrats can determine which laws get passed. So you might have heard that in the last election, Republicans actually won the majority in both the House and the Senate. This means that now the balance of power is tipped towards the Republicans, whereas 4 years ago when Obama was president, it was actually tipped the other way. So it's a way for the people of the United States to really say, okay, that didn't work, we're going to do something different. And really a true form of checks and balances for the people, I mean. Next, the majority party. Have you ever heard of that, the majority party? This is the one with the most elected members. All right, sorry guys. So the majority party is the one that has the most elected members, and they can easily influence laws by getting all of its members to vote the same way on a bill. Unfortunately, this isn't always easy, or maybe that's good for us, because members of one political party don't necessarily agree on all of the issues. But in American politics, it's common for most lawmakers from one party to vote the same way. Meanwhile, the minority party works to promote the views of its supporters by forcing compromise with the majority party. If the minority party is successful, this can create laws that are balanced between the two parties' viewpoints. Now, this is really interesting to me because in Hawaii, you guys have a primarily Democratic legislature. So there's only 5 Republicans in your legislature. That means that anybody that aligns with the Republican viewpoint doesn't really have a voice at the legislature, because when you look at how laws are passed and who gets to vote, it's usually a 2/3 majority that passes legislation. And that's on an extreme case, but even less so, it could be 50% majority. Well, if you have 5 Republicans in the entire legislature, they're never going to get either of those numbers. So you really don't have a way for conservative people living in Hawaii to voice what they need to happen at the state level. So many of you might have heard of what's going on with Beth Fukumoto. She's the representative for Mililani District, but she abandoned her party, so she left the Republican Party to join the Democratic Party. So it's interesting because she was elected by her district as a Republican, and then she left to join as a Democrat. So that's for you to decide, is that the right thing to do? Is that the wrong thing to do? I think, there's plenty of speeches on why she chose to do that, but it's an interesting, I think, question for us. So at what point do we stop aligning with our party values? And at what point do we kind of abandon that altogether for the sake of the country or the sake of our constituents? But it's a really interesting question. So if you were interested in that line of questioning or that line of reasoning, that might be another good topic to research. So maybe looking at Beth Fukumoto, doing an interview with her, and using that for your project. All right, I digress. So in the executive branch, the president and the state governors, they almost always belong to a political party. Just like the lawmakers, their views usually align with the political party's platform. A president or governor works for the people, not the party, but he or she may be very committed to advancing the party's goals. He or she does not make laws, but is key in developing public policy. The stand of the government, the stand of how the government addresses certain issues. This is really just how the issue should be handled from the government's perspective, if that makes sense. A president or governor's policies are usually in line with their political party's platform. And a president or governor who belongs to the same party as the minority in the legislature may also disagree with many laws passed by the majority and may veto those laws. So here's another, viewpoint for us into checks and balances. What does that look like, and how have presidents used the veto in the past? That could be another interesting topic that you may look for in your project. Political parties and you. You've probably already seen political parties in action. Obviously, after this election, most of you should be adapted to that kind of campaigning. During elections, political parties work to influence voters by distributing information about candidates and issues. Next time you see a campaign ad on television, look closely at the fine print at the bottom, and you might see that a political party has funded the ad. But beware, all of the information a political party distributes is biased towards its own views. This means that information from the political parties should not be your only source of information about candidates and issues. So some of you guys might have seen the little handouts that we all got on our doors when Caldwell was running for mayor again. So we got these little handouts that were tucked under our doors almost every day about how bad he was and why he was lying and what all was wrong. And so it's interesting to look at who funded that. Who was willing to say, he's a liar, he's stealing, who was saying that? Because it's not to say that they're wrong either, but it's just interesting to compare, what are their prior politics and what are the politics of the person they're running against. That could be another project you choose. So when you turn 18 and you register to vote, the application will probably let you check a box to join a political party. But joining a political party is not a requirement. And even if you check a box, you can still vote for anyone you want. During a presidential election in many states, party membership lets you participate in that state's primary election or caucus to help decide who your party's presidential candidate will be. Some states even let you participate if you don't belong to a party. So this is really up to you. How involved do you want to be? When I was living in Missouri, right after I turned 18, I joined the caucus in my district, and it was one of the neatest experiences I have ever had. So if you're interested in looking into, how does the organizational piece work? How do you decide for Hawaii, how did they get together and say, okay, we want Hillary Clinton? Did they just write it in? Did they get in a room? Like, what does that look like? So that might be another thing you could research and you could do a project on for this Genius Hour end project, if that makes sense. So at this time, you're going to go ahead and log out of this, go in and take the quiz, the low stakes quiz, and then make sure you have your notes ready for the exam tomorrow, or the quiz tomorrow rather.